Let's do
It
it.
is 6 o'clock.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening. Welcome to the Select Board meeting for February 22nd, 2018. This will be a brief meeting simply because we're just going to take care of a couple pieces of business, and then the Budget Committee will be joining us in a joint workshop at 6:30. And so I would ask members of the board to just be cognizant that we would like to accomplish that time. If we do get done a little early, we'll have a break. I would like to add one thing to the agenda, and I'll just add this under my own Select Board communications if you don't mind. I just became aware of a county budget committee which we have a legal input into, and so I will share some information on that and sort of a background on that. So without further ado, we'll start with the Select Board meeting minutes of February 5th, 2018. So the minutes are in our packet.
I got the minutes of January 22nd.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
I didn't see
Which
the
have already
fifth.
been
Yeah.
approved, so.
Which have already been
And that's what
approved.
I have as well, which I duly read over. But what we'll do then is we'll just simply table those minutes, and we'll get the minutes for February 5th in the next Select Board packet and review them. And
I'm sure they look
Just
amazing.
checking that the title might be.
you think the title's wrong?
No,
Yes.
it's not. No, because it
No.
has me absent.
Yeah,
and-
okay, no, you're right.
Yep.
I just want
Yep.
to double check, because sometimes they get mislabeled, so. Yeah, I will make sure we get the
Yep.
Okay.
So,
set.
Very good.
biggie.
That allows us to move on to warrants 33 and 34.
Okay, Bruce did the warrant for the state fees for $3,094.25. I did the one for $1,706.50. And the regular warrant for $30,872.64. There was $4,085 for the sidewalk holder. And we bought salt, $5,569, and those are the two big expenses in the warrant.
Is the holder working properly?
It's working great.
Jeez. Now, how much money, like, didn't we approve 14,000?
Yeah, I think we're in it for just over 10 at this point.
Okay, thank you.
So we still have money to spend.
We do, but I'm trying not to, because even though we're keeping it running for the season, the likelihood that we'll get most or even part of that back through resale or trade-in
Yeah.
is fairly slim. So
Yeah.
I don't want to put money in other than what's absolutely required to keep it going and safe. And that's honestly where we've been this year, and unfortunately, it's come up to that $10,000 total.
I concur.
Okay, and we have a payroll of $15,464.88, so a total warrant for 33, 33A, 33B, and 34 is $46,337.52.
I'll make a motion to approve the warrant as presented in the amount of $46,337.52.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded to approve warrants 33 and 34 and any sub-warrants A and B in the amount of $46,337.52. Any further discussion or questions?
Yes.
Please.
On the Peggy Flaherty, do we know what that was?
That was,
Reference to? Sorry.
that was the cemetery ordinance. It was some personnel. It was a mixture of things. It wasn't one big thing.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
Is assessing by the month or the quarter?
That
for
is
David
monthly.
Ledoux?
Monthly,
Monthly?
Yep.
And that is a contract service?
yes, yep. And we do get typically 3 to 4 days per month with that. The assessor, he was in today, for example. So we do get a little bit more out of it than just the 2 days of open to the public that's in the contract. Because we are working together, he's learning a little bit about the municipal side of things, having come from the state. So we're getting a little bit more out of that. But of course, he has a little bit of a learning curve, so I think we're in a good place.
Great.
So he's working out well.
He is working out well, yeah, yep.
And then what video equipment did we purchase?
Some of these,
Oh, more mics. Oh, nice.
New mics, we got a bunch of new stuff,
Look at
yeah.
it.
Yep.
Holy mackerel.
That's nice. But it was more than mics?
yeah, he bought all, Eric knows.
Yeah, there was a media cart, I believe, components for downstairs was
That's
a
right.
lot of it.
Sorry, I remember.
So we have a media cart that's for that, the small meeting room, so we can do teleconference and things like that. So Bill's been doing excellent moving that along over the course of the winter here, and I think that in the next couple of months, we should be ready to rock and roll.
And B&H is a good group to do business with. I use them through the school.
Yeah, they've been great.
And is this a new monitor we have here?
This is one we've had in the past. Bill's painted the media cart since the last time you've seen it, I believe. So it's just a nice add-on. This I think we got as a donation from UMA, I believe. So thanks to Bill's resourcefulness.
Yeah,
Well,
it's like
and-
MacGyver.
And what a great person to have working with us, so thank you very much, Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
Other questions on the warrants?
No.
Seeing none, all in favor? All opposed? It's unanimous. We'll move on to Select Board Communications, please. And so, who has something?
I have something, maybe it's just more of an announcement, but
Okay.
I was one of the folks who called in a fire on the Adele Road about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And it was a really icy night, and we stayed and watched for about an hour, and we were only passed by 2 cars. So it was not a night anybody wanted to be out. But my whole family was there, and we were fascinated by how the fire departments work together and alone, and what they do when there's an equipment malfunction. The training that those people have is remarkable. It was just a fine piece of work to watch, and safety, you could tell, was their first concern, and I was thoroughly impressed. So a big shout out to our fire department and the regional assistants.
I
Thank you so
followed the
much.
Manchester fire truck into town that night. And the roads were actually icy. They were slippery. And,
Yep.
yeah, that was amazing. Good job by them.
Any other board members who wish to address the board or the public?
Did you notice if there was a sand truck there?
Yes, John Cushing came by multiple times.
Nice.
Yeah, and they were using the fire hole down at Maranacook. So it was a pretty quick turnaround, and Adele Road is short, and they were able to just keep looping around, and there were 2 or 3 tankers lined up. So as soon as one emptied into the reservoir, another one was coming right behind it. It was, it just amazing.
Good.
A lot of organization and training goes into that.
Yeah, we can't say enough about that and need to support them.
Any other? Okay, well, I'll move on to the item I talked about, which is the County Budget Committee. I just became aware of this because a member of another town board contacted me and asked me about Reed Field or any member from Reed Field going to a meeting where the Budget Committee is selected. So this is all kind of new to me, and I didn't want to obviously commit to doing this until I discussed this with the board. And indeed, I cannot be there. It's on Tuesday night at 5:30. I have an out-of-town work commitment that
This
just
coming
won't.
Tuesday?
Yeah, this coming Tuesday, the 27th. So here's how, I went into the relevant sections of state law, and basically for Kennebec County, it allows 9 members to be elected to this county budget committee, and each municipality has 1 vote. They review, obviously, the budget for the county, and since that's part of our duties in assessing, it would make sense for us to, if not this time, to now stay in connection with this. 6 members of the legislative delegation are also appointed to this committee. It just sounds like it's a pretty pro forma thing that's been done in the past. I don't believe we've ever received a letter saying on such and such a date, your municipality has a vote to do this. And I did not see in the law any requirements for public notice or anything like that. So I'm glad we know about it now. And I guess I would ask if anybody can make it to the Gardner Library on February 27th at 5:30 to represent us. And if we would duly authorize that person to vote for whomever they think may be appropriate. I assume candidates for that committee will show up there. And if there's none, then we'll just stay in touch with this.
And this is a budget committee for the county?
For the county. The county the county commissioners, I'm assuming, devise a budget in connection with the treasurer, who is an elected official. And I'm assuming that just like our budget committee reviews and recommends, that this is also something that happens. It doesn't go to a public hearing format, I don't believe, but this budget committee sits in state law, at least for Kennebec County, and I think it does for other counties as well. Also, we share the district attorney job, the county attorney job with Somerset County, so there's that amount in our budget as well.
Very interesting.
It is all very interesting, so it's all new to me.
Has to be a select board member.
It has to be an elected official of the town, yes. Yep, that's what
'Cause
the
I
law
thought maybe
says.
somebody from the budget committee. But
No, an elected official of the town.
I'm not available.
Yeah, I can't make it either. I wish
Unfortunately.
And we're electing, did you say 9 members at
There would be
large?
9 people that would be chosen, and I don't know if this is a slate which county commissioners normally recruit or, or whatever. But
Is Rita Moran running for that?
she is on the town of Winthrop Council, and I believe she's interested in serving on the budget
I
committee.
thought I got
Yeah.
an email from her.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, well, that's what sparked my questions, so then I looked into this further. I didn't talk to our county commissioner who represents us, who's Nancy Rhines. I was out of the country and just put in a call, and she was not home, so. So if no one can make it, that's fine.
Yeah.
Obviously, we haven't done this in the past, but now we'll stay in touch with it,
Right.
okay? Is
Yeah.
that-
It's a yearly thing, you said.
Yeah.
We'll put it on our
I'm assuming
future
it's an
calendar
annual
for-
budget. Could be a
We'll get it in
biannual for all I
January.
know.
Right.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Great.
Okay,
Thank you for bringing that to our attention.
like I said, it was all new to me, but you can just look up Kennebec County Budget Committee under state law and just read it for yourself if you would like. It's very straightforward. A lot of it has been repealed, and then there's a replacement piece, like a lot of state law. Okay, so we'll move on to staff reports. Eric?
All right, I have a couple included in the packet here, the treasurer's report, as well as something from Gary for the quarterly, or not really quarterly, I think it's 2-month period reporting. But I'll start with my town manager's report and just give a brief update that the roads are now fully posted. As of today, we were able to get the rest of them covered with those wonderful orange signs that advise folks to be cautious on our roads. Keith Sylvester, our new maintenance person, is doing a fantastic job. And the integration and training process has been going very smoothly. So I'm quite pleased with how that has been going. And the website continues to receive a lot of attention. We keep adding forms. We now have a fillable application for boards and committees. We're working on the employment form, same way. So trying to, again, integrate as much as we possibly can into that. And again, I'm very pleased with the progress. Kristen has been doing a lot of work with that. And I think that Robin's been helping as well. As far as ordinance work goes, we did have a meeting today with Catherine and a few members of the staff to go over a few of the additional ordinances that we've been looking at. And I think that we may be able to, in addition to the animal control ordinance, move ahead perhaps with transportation if I'm able to pull some things together and get a good draft in. We've had a couple issues recently that have made a few points clear that we could and should probably be having a few more rules on the books to allow us to fully and appropriately manage traffic and parking in town. We had a vehicle that's been parked and obstructing snow removal, and we are unable to take any real direct action on it because we don't have an ordinance authorizing us to do so. So we're having to rely on the county or the sheriffs or the DOT, and they both see it really as a local issue. So I think there's some need there, but other than that, I've been very busy working on the budget process and recovering from some kind of illness that I've had over the last month, basically. But finally, I think getting to the end of it, so pleased with that. But that's my manager's report in short. Treasurer's report is a little bit interesting this month. We did finally receive our draft audit, and the numbers look good. We again we're a little bit conservative in our estimates, and so what we see coming forward into our carry forwards, undesignated and designated, do appear to be a little bit more than what we had budgeted initially. So that's only going to help us out this year as we go through the budget process, as it has in years past, because of that approach. We did have one bounce check for the month, but that was a minor issue. We really don't have those very often.
A bounce check passed to us.
Passed to
not
us, yes,
bouncing a
not
check.
by the town, no.
Right.
No.
To the town.
Yes.
To the town, yeah.
Just
I
trying to be
report-
clear with that.
Yeah, you're correct to do so. And then our accounts for the month of January did raise some questions for me, because we were looking a lot more flush than we have in the past, to the tune of $355,000. And so I did look into that, and the difference will drop in the coming months as we begin spending on road work and other capital expenditures. But the differential in revenues was primarily dealing with expenditures year to date. So that was one reason why we have this. We haven't spent as much as we did in the past. So, but like I said, that will change. Most revenues and expense accounts should be at about 60%. So when you look at all of the supporting information, you'll see that those numbers are starting to get a lot closer to that. We have less variability getting into the second half of the year. And one thing we did see was a small increase in revenues for tax revenues. I think part because of the prepayment of taxes that we've seen over the past couple of months, in order some people thinking that they'll be able to capitalize on the tax prior to the change in the tax policy, which is a possibility and will benefit folks, but only if they had paid for the second half of taxes that are due in February of this year. Nobody was able to prepay for future years. So that is one reason why we may have seen that small bump in tax revenue. And I expect that we'll see a drop in February as folks are no longer doing that and don't put in any money ahead of time. So that's my treasurer's report, and I'm happy to take any questions on either.
Are there any questions for Eric on the treasurer's report or his manager's report?
Is the equipment at the transfer station now working properly?
It is, yes. We haven't received a bill for the work yet, but I believe it's going to be in the low thousands, $2,000 to $4,000. So certainly more than I'd want to see again. But we do know the cause, and we are taking action to address it through a more direct maintenance plan and a reporting feedback loop, so that I know if the work wasn't done, that at the very least by the end of the month I will know yay or nay. And this is something that should be happening essentially bi-weekly, at least the investigation of the condition of that machine. So we did have an issue, and we're taking action to correct it.
Thank you.
I would just say thank you for the meeting we had today. It was very useful, and the animal control ordinance, Anna, Robin, and I really revised. It's almost all grammatical sorts of changes. and wording issues, and then a little bit of clarification on the fees, so that it would be much more user-friendly to the public rather than just a legal document. So that one's really all ready to bring forward to us, and they, all three, including Eric, had great input. So it's just a matter of what they can get done and what they feel is the priority, if anything else comes forward to us. It was a
Great.
great meeting.
Thank you.
Was the stray pig taken care of?
It was, and apparently it was getting ready to have piglets. So we got it out just in time because we could have had 7 or 8 problems instead of just one. Yep.
Very good. We also have in our packet the code office report for January, and appreciate having that report as well, Eric.
I find that very useful.
Yes.
Yeah, and I like the, by the way, side note, the booklet staple, brilliant. Brilliant.
Yes.
Much easier than the corner,
Noticed
right?
and appreciated.
Well,
I immediately pulled out the staples and used my old fashioned.
And of course, I don't need staples.
Yes, that's right. Appreciated.
Catherine,
Noted and
save
yes,
her
yes,
paper.
but you need sideways vision.
Okay, we'll get back on
I
track.
can-
Sorry, yep.
I can change that.
Don't be sorry. Are there any members of the public who would like to address the select board? Seeing none, I'll take a motion to stand in recess until the workshop begins at 6:30.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? We are in recess until 6:30. Thank you.
Then I'll-
We'll move out of recess now and into the joint workshop for capital planning. And basically, Eric will be leading us through some of the steps in this. This is a workshop, so, you know, you can roll up your sleeves, you can ask questions, and so on and so forth. So for the public watching, let's, because we have the Budget Committee here with us, why don't we just go around the table and introduce ourselves?
I'm Andy Tolman. I'm the chair of the Budget Committee.
Lynn Schneider, Budget Committee.
Marty Fanish, Budget Committee.
Val Palmo, Budget Committee.
Eric Dyer, Town Manager. Chill out, Dennis. You're gonna really jump on me.
I was just like looking at you. That is surprised I'm on the select board.
John Parent, Select Board.
Catherine Mills Woodson Select Board.
Chris Salmon, Select Board.
Bruce Burgoyne, Select Board. So welcome, and we'll start with a review and discussion of the capital planning process itself. Eric?
Yeah, so we've been working away at this over the last couple of years, and we do have some documents in place. And actually, I hadn't thought to discuss those. Ellen had some great questions last week about what was and wasn't a capital asset, and I think that we certainly can answer that in part using the policy that we have in place. However, I think it's worth taking a look at this in some cases. I'm already noticing that some of the provisions in that may need to be revised. We are looking at currently capitalizing based on the purchase price of some of these items. And most of the things we have are assets. We don't necessarily have a really reliable price for. Some things, fire trucks, we can and do. But I think that looking at the cost new might be a better approach. But that's just one thing that I've been noticing as I've been going through this exercise of pulling most of our assets together. We still have some that are out there. And certainly there's some things that I've included in our spreadsheet that are hard to classify as an asset per se, but might be more of a reserve. And that's one of the challenges that I've found, going through this, looking at a 5-year plan, and also to the right of the spreadsheet, we have another 20 years going out. So not included in the packets, but certainly a lot of these assets have lifespans that far exceed a 5-year horizon. So the intent is to focus just on that 5-year horizon. But those are just some things I was thinking about as I went through this. We do have, this was approved in 2016 or 17, I believe. And one of the things one of the tools, I should say, that we have that I haven't utilized yet this year is this capital expenditure request form. And it's not too late in the process to do that, and I plan on providing this to any committees that are requesting expenditures, and it will help, I think, greatly clarify some of the reasoning, the need, and the costs for these things, and if there are other ways to approach them. A prime example might be the salt sand shed building that needs some major repairs. The road committee could look at this and say, what are the pros and cons of doing this versus not doing this? Are there alternative approaches besides the concrete application that they've suggested? What if we don't do this? What are the consequences of that? And really trying to get the information that decision makers, being the budget committee and select board, need to have an informed decision by asking those questions. So I will be putting these out to the committees, and I'll be having to complete a few myself, and presenting those then completed to the budget committee and select board for consideration, and the public, so we can all understand better, why we do need a new sidewalk machine. And I can explain, some of the history around that in a form that's concise and consistent, repeatable, all those things. So those two items are things that we have to help guide us through the process. And I do look forward, especially talking with Ellen about some of these criteria and whether or not we would want to adjust them. Right now, we have a threshold of $5,000 in 2 years for a capital asset. And we do make some special distinctions for infrastructure assets because we try to capitalize those a little bit differently. But as I said, I'm not sure we need to. I think that we should probably capitalize everything the way that we're proposing, capitalizing infrastructure at this point and just doing current value. But
May I ask a question?
sure, yeah.
Right after those forms in our packet, there's a capital asset inventory. Is that just there as an example, or is that pertinent to something tonight?
That is there as an example, and
Okay, thank you.
Our policy does require that we do an inventory every 3 years. The last one that was done was 2013, and that was prior to the policy. Since the policy, I've yet to complete one, so it's a bit of a challenge to myself and a note to you all that I need to be doing that. So in continuing on with this process, I will be conducting a full asset inventory, looking at the physical facilities and equipment, but also utilizing some of our resources, which include insurance documents from Maine Municipal, records from the fire department, other town records, and pulling together as best we can a complete assessment of what we have, and then moving on. All of that information will feed into how we manage it.
Great.
Question?
Yeah, Marty.
I'm sorry, did you?
No, I was just saying great.
If I understand the policy, an asset is carried as a purchase cost, its original cost or historical cost, until it's disposed of?
That's how it reads now, and I'm not sure that that's the best approach. And I'm looking for suggestions if you think it might be better to just go with the replacement value as a simpler way of looking at it.
So that would always be a moving target.
It would, to some extent. And a lot of these are, I think that what I'm finding is that we don't necessarily know what a new roof for the town office is going to cost unless we bid it out. So we have a kind of a range based on things that we've seen, things that we paid for, best guesses in some cases. And so as we get closer and closer on that horizon, things that are coming up in 5 years, we need to be paying more attention to, and things that are coming up in the next year, we should have, be in the process of getting bids for. Much like we have with getting information on a new sidewalk machine, for example, or looking at what it cost the town of Mount Vernon last year to fix their salt sand shed. So the closer we are on that horizon, the more reliable and accurate those need to be, obviously.
The reason I'm asking about this is that most of the civilized world follows depreciation accounting. so that if you have an asset that cost $100,000 and you expect it to last 5 years, each year you reduce the value by $20,000, so that you're showing how much of that life of that asset is left, rather than saying I have a $100,000 asset, but it's not going to last much longer. I know that a lot of municipalities do not follow depreciation accounting, but the reason I'm asking this question has to do with improvements and repairs. Like you had the example of the town hall roof. If the building is being carried at historical cost and you have a $5,000 roof repair, are you increasing the value of the building by $5,000?
That's a good question. Yeah, no, that's a very good question, and it's something that I have to ask the auditor. But I don't believe we follow that type of accounting.
Okay.
I think that we do have a fairly, if I remember correctly anyway, complex schedule for our road infrastructure, but I don't believe we have our other assets managed in the same way.
I would imagine that you don't, but again, and we talked about this last week, I would really sit down with the auditors, the old ones or whoever the new ones are, and talk this through, because they work for you, or they work for us, we hire them. Part of their job is to provide advice and guidance on how they think you best represent the town's fiscal picture to the public. And that's what the audit is for. Transparency and accountability. And I know they will have an opinion.
Excellent, yeah, thank you.
Who's the auditor? What's the audit firm now?
We use R.H.R. Smith currently, and have for
Years.
It's going on a decade, yeah, so. As I said, we will be putting that service out to bid, and I think that there is some good thought behind the fact that even if they're not necessarily the lowest price, that perhaps moving to a different company to get a different perspective on our finances and a different picture and outlook may be worth considering. So.
It's best practice to change every 5 years. So otherwise you're too cozy. It's comfortable and it's easy, but and it's a pain to change, but it's also not good to be staying with the same firm for a long period of time.
Yeah, I agree with that. I know when I was on the school board of SAD 52, we ran into some situations where vendors or legal or accounting firms got comfortable with, and all of a sudden things just got out of hand a little bit, so I firmly believe that you should at least take a look at it.
Yeah.
Every 5 years, and give people notice that you're looking at it.
Yeah, well, they do know that we're going to be putting it out to bid, so it shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody, and I think it's going to be a good process, and there are a lot of good, reputable firms out there, so it's not as though we're going to be having any diminished service level. There's a very wide field.
And if this firm wants to bid again, at the very least, they should change the managing partner on the engagement, so you have a different team.
That's a good suggestion.
Are there other questions or observations or comments on the policy itself or procedurally?
Could we talk a little about what GASB 34 means for us? I'm not as much of a financial expert as some of my colleagues here, and I don't want the university level, but kind of the base level of what do those accounting standards drive us to do.
Yeah, that's where I believe the infrastructure, the strict requirements for infrastructure accounting come into play. And I'll ask Ellen to maybe explain that a little bit more, if
Well,
it's too simple of an
Yeah,
explanation.
well, no, you're right. It's commonly referred to as GASB.
Yeah.
So there's GASB and FASB, but the governmental stuff is GASB, and it's this, I don't
General
know.
Accounting Standards Board, I know.
Yes, this cabal of experts who sit around and think about the rules for standardizing government reporting. And you need to follow the rules so that you know that everybody's playing the game the same way.
I was just wondering whether they covered depreciation and that sort of thing that
Yeah,
you
they
were talking
do.
about.
Yeah, they do. And those rules change all the time, which makes it fun. It keeps accountants and auditors in business.
And the business.
Yeah.
It's the Auditor's Full Employment Act.
Yes. And, I mean, they're not unreasonable rules, but you know that everybody's
Yeah.
following the same framework.
Eric, procedurally, the capital request form, is that a must, or is that,
I think it needs to be a must. I think that we.
I would agree.
Particularly with this year, seeing some of the questions we've had around, certain types of expenditures and reserve accounts. And, for example, the library, we looked at that and we said, we're not really certain about what we need. We think we would like to see some money put away, but, without a picture, of how that money is going to be spent, it's not always, the wisest choice to put away any sum of money without having a clear picture. And so this is just a way to clarify what the intent is. Another example might be the stone wall repair at the cemeteries. We're not sure exactly when that's going to happen or if it should even be an asset in this classification, but it's been requested. So I think that getting that information from the cemetery committee, from the library perhaps, in those two examples, is really fundamentally important to having a discussion about, when and how and if these things happen. So yes, that's the intent, and that's why we'll be putting these out to the committees.
great.
So you think we should change the definition of capital assets and start using the request form? Those are the two major things you want to do to this policy?
Well, I think that overall, looking at it and talking about it with the auditor is the right direction. We've talked about it and we've looked at it, but I think that, we can improve and be more consistent with where our audit is, which is really, I think, an integral part of this, making sure that the work we do is compatible and has the same level of transparency and ease of the public, if they're interested, looking at one set of documents and looking at our audit and having them be at least close to compatible.
I know that when this was developed, Andy and I were both sitting on the budget committee, and back then, we had made it required. So if it's not, I can't really find it in here, so if it's not, it should be put back in my opinion.
Required the,
As far as
The request form.
Yeah, I
Oh.
think it should be also.
And it gives you a history to fall back on. Gives you-
yes, that was another point, yeah.
And you're
Right.
treating everybody
Yeah.
the same way.
Right, and I mean, we developed this back in like 2007,
Something like that.
because we didn't have any long-term capital plan at all
Mm.
before that. Maybe it was 2005, but, I mean,
Let me look, I can tell you when this one was
this
approved.
was all new stuff back then, and we thought it was really important that things have a request and that the inventory be done, because so much was being done based on an employee's recollection. And then the employee leaves, there goes the recollection.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, so this was last updated in December of 2016, so I think that it's time to take a look at it again, especially, with those considerations that we just talked about, so.
Yeah,
I will-
I still have an issue with these collections.
Okay,
I know I was being a pain about it last week. I just don't think computers are a capital asset these days. Their useful lives are so short.
Yeah.
I know some people hold on to them until they're 12 years old, but really,
Yeah, no, I don't have an issue taking that out of the
I
capital.
think they're an expense item, but
If this was written back in 2005, it was a whole different industry then than it is now, so.
right, but it was updated 2 years ago.
Okay.
I mean, I
But
just
yeah.
approach it differently. I have like no problem with a telephone system being capitalized. But just because you buy 6 computers at once and you spend
Yeah.
$5,000, I don't think that makes it a capital asset. But again, that's something to discuss the pros and cons with the auditor.
I mean, do radios and pagers really fit in here? Under
Those
that?
are a bit more expensive, and I think they do have a bit more of a longer life, at least until the FCC changes the bandwidth again, and we have to get new, narrower, more precise equipment. But
If they're part of a network, so the radios may be, I don't know about pagers.
Do we even use pagers?
I'm not sure we do anymore with the fire system.
But I know we have like
Cell phones?
walkie-talkie things,
It
right?
is,
So,
SkyTel pager.
So, yeah, that's a good thing to ask, probably the auditors, you know, what is
Yeah,
really,
I have to concur. I wouldn't think that a computer, it almost seems like you're right. I mean, you buy it and 3 weeks later, it's all right. So I understand that. Like radios and pages, I don't envision that same thing because they also seem to be like such a like technology, something else going to come wrong. Now, if does the town provide cell phones?
We do not.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, that to me, would that be a capital investment?
I wouldn't think so
No.
either.
So it fall under the same thing as computers, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
I think I see what you're saying. It's-
I see a consensus. I made a
Cell
note
phones
to drop
are
computers off
computers.
the off the
Okay.
list.
but
All right, next.
but
Yes, okay.
sometimes a server is a capital asset.
Right.
Because they're very expensive.
Yeah.
So, or a telephone system
Mhm.
Yeah,
is a capital
A little
asset.
sort of
But
disposable things.
yeah.
I mean, I agree, furniture is a capital asset.
Yep.
I don't think a file cabinet is, though. And even if you buy 10 of them, I don't think they are.
Yeah.
So you-
So it should
And I
be,
think your
investment
balance
doesn't
sheet
seem-
works better when you just expense those items.
so what you're saying is the cost doesn't necessarily make it a capital item.
Well, these are collections of things, so
right.
it would only hit that $5,000 if you bought a lot of them. But I think that your balance sheet may portray, or more accurately depict your financial position if you expense those kinds of items rather than carry them as assets,
And
capital.
they're all purchased in different years,
Here,
so
here.
that collection is really kind of
That's really not a
bastardized.
collection, yeah.
Yeah.
and this isn't an ordinance, so this is something, Eric, if you get, when you get feedback from the auditors, just bring it to us as the select board and we can read it twice and approve it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I'd like it run by the budget committee too,
Yeah.
for some,
Right, definitely.
help with defining.
I have one suggestion for, in addition to the policy, and that would be that the town will maintain schedules of planned and potential capital investments over, say, a 5-year period. I think that would help you in a number of ways that if you have, to the best it can be predicted, not, things happen that weren't expected, but if they're maintained as well, projected as well as you can, then you can plan it out, you can plan your bonding, and you can say, well, here's a year coming up 3 years from now where we have nothing scheduled. Maybe that would be a good year to replace some expensive thing that you might be able to have limp along for another year.
Isn't that what this is? though?
Yeah, but I'm saying, I think that having that as part of the policy, that you
Oh,
will
it's part of
maintain,
the policy.
yeah, that you will maintain these schedules
Yeah.
to help planning capital investments.
Well, I think it's in there, it just doesn't have the time period. I think it's in 4, at the bottom of page 1, that we will maintain a capital investment plan. It will be
Oh, okay.
updated in conjunction with the annual budget process, but I think if you put in the 5-year,
Yeah, I like that.
having it extend at least 5 years in the future, that was always the
Okay.
intent. I
Okay.
actually liked the 20, when we were developing this, I liked the 20-year picture because of the fire equipment. Because we know that that's going to cycle through often, and it's going to have increasing costs. And we have a pretty good idea of what roads are going to do, and there are 2 biggest expenses that come up.
Yes.
Well, I think the option is there to project further than 5 years
Oh, it is,
on 2 or 3 very key items like that.
right.
And we have
Should.
this spreadsheet that we put together does go out about 25 years, but we can look at that too, if you'd like, especially on, like you said, specific assets. I wouldn't want to do it on everything, but
No.
No.
absolutely, we have the
Bigger
ability.
ticket items.
Yeah.
I think I was noticing, I'm not trying to get ahead, but in relation to this topic, that it looks like we have a couple of fire truck things coming up in really quick succession soon. And I was like, wow, how did we do that? So, when we get to that, I just want to remember to look at that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, unless there's other questions or thoughts on this, why don't we move into the 5-year capital investment plan draft?
All right, I'll pull that up on the screen here. What's in your packets I have added a couple of things to look at, because I was doing a bit of a reconciliation between what we have on our budget for this year and some of those items, and I had missed a few. But again, I'm having a kind of, I wouldn't say a challenging time, but I'm trying to figure out with this plan, what exactly are we trying to show? The old plan I was working with had things like existing debt included. And so I've taken that out because I didn't see that necessarily as, being necessary for this picture. And I look at this much like we look at many of our accounting items. We have different buckets, we have different windows we look through with different purposes and goals. And so with the exception of a few of the annual savings, annual reserve accounts, like say for the revaluation reserve, the goal of this sheet has been to show what something's going to cost and when it's going to come due. So that's the real primary focus of this document, as I put it together, has been to show just that. What is it going to cost? When's it going to come due? And in some cases, we know that we have something coming up, so we might tweak the formula a little bit, and it'll show up in FY19, or we just give it a standard, 5-year increment life block and see where it ends up. So that's the goal. I tried to include as much relevant information as I could. I do have the opportunity to put in notes, and I've done a few, but I think that there's probably a need to have more notes as we go through and look at these things. But I see the action as being important. I guess I'll back up all the way to the left. I've tried to do this by area of work or operation, as opposed to putting rolling stock in one category, putting buildings in another category. So this approach has been to look at it from operational perspective, which I think it works, but I'm open to suggestions on that as well. A brief description of the item, and then a statement about what the action that we're looking for. The year refers to the year it was constructed, purchased, built, and I didn't know of necessarily a better way to title that, but that year refers to more or less the starting point. The life, again, is life expectancy of the item, and expected replacement would be the start date plus the life, in essence. And we have a lot of zeros here, and you'll see them throughout the document. These are for things that are indeterminate. We don't know either when they started, or we don't know necessarily if or when they're going to be completed. They've been put forward, and so they're included here for discussion and consideration. And the cemetery has a few of those, because we don't know a lot of those items, and some of them may need to be removed. A tree work, for example, is one that I certainly see as more likely and more appropriately being an operational expense that happens every year. And yeah, it's probably going to be $5,000 every year or less, but it really comes down to more of an operational expense than a capital. Moving on to the next column, we have the estimated cost new, and that's just my way of looking at it and saying, well, when this falls for replacement, this is what it's likely going to cost in current dollars, so this will need to be updated regularly.
But that's where a note might help, because some of this, like with the cemetery, they have some engineering quotes or estimates or something, that it's a harder estimate than just a guess.
Just a guess, yeah, absolutely. And notes, I think that we can put them in there and have them just be a little tick mark in the corner, a little red tick mark, and they don't have to overpower the entire document. You can still get the functionality, but also have that next level of information in there. So that is one of the next iterations of this will include a lot more notation in that format.
Eric, what does the 0 mean at the top of the next column?
That is anything that is indeterminate. So basically, it's a what I did was set up a formula so that if say the formula.
We're at the wrong 0. Sorry, up there.
This
That
one?
0.
The unscheduled?
Is that
means
just time
indeterminate.
0?
That means indeterminate, yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Because basically, anything that has a date that's, say if we go down to the first one that has a date would be 2031 for the library septic tank. If you go over to the left here and I unhide the columns, let's see here, we can keep going all the way over to 20, it might not show up in 2031. Okay, here we go. It's 2030, I guess. Where is it? I'm looking for it. Oh, yeah, okay.
6,000.
Yeah, so that shows up out in the future there. So the formula basically says, if it says it should be there, that's where it puts it.
Gotcha.
And so the 0 is for anything that we don't know yet. So
Okay.
kind of a long answer there, but.
But so if you look at the Giles Hall, the boiler, the HVAC system for the building,
Yep.
and it says estimated replacement 2017 at 25,000. Has that been done or not done?
No, that has not, and that hasn't. And that would be one reason why there might be a 0 or a. Well, actually, that's the only one I think. You picked the only one that doesn't have a.
Sorry.
Salt sand shed is in the same
Yeah.
situation down below.
Which is, Bruce?
The salt sand shed
At the,
is a 2017 date as well.
road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's under consideration in the budget process.
Yes, that is, yep. And so that is under consideration.
So these are like past due.
Yeah, some things that are past due, and I actually did update this in my spreadsheet to show that one really should be due for repair and replacement.
So going back to the Guile Hall boiler, so that we might be reassessing that?
Yeah, we absolutely should, and that's the exact purpose of this document, is to say, hey, have we missed something? Do we need to do an investigation? Should we get a company down? We've done a lot of work on it, and that's one reason why I'm not as concerned at this point, but those are notes I should be making, that yeah, we replaced 2 of the zones last year, and the furnace is maintained regularly, and there's been no indication we're going to have a problem. But
So it may extend the date.
it may extend the date, yeah, so that's what we would want to look at and consider. But that's exactly why we're looking at this in this way.
Or we may want to consider a whole different system now that there are the mini splits.
The heat pumps,
Put in.
yeah, yep.
Right.
Those would be good for downstairs. Upstairs, we would have to probably still have some form of mass heating system. But,
For up here?
So Eric, is,
yeah.
I'm sorry, so is this whole document here is a new document that's sort of what we're test driving?
It's
Is that
not
whole-
new, it's a new take on a,
It's revised.
it's revised, yeah, it's a revised version, based on some of the feedback I received in the 5-year outlook.
Hold on, new here, so.
You can't use that anymore.
That comes up every
It looks a little different.
So Dennis, you're the recipient of the nice, easier to look at version.
Well, I'm, of course, as well. I
Just
should
for
be.
you.
Yeah, I think it's
Well, you should be. Here we go.
ushered in a time of change.
You're special. You're special, Dennis.
That's what I've always heard.
I think we're all special, right?
I'm in our own way.
So I think that this is a little bit cleaner. If you see anything that you would like to see added, any additional information, the notes are an absolute great point. But in finding that balance between ease of reading and the full breadth of information you might want, if you see anything else, let me know that you'd like to see added or included, or even the way this is structured. So open to any suggestions on that.
Yeah, Excel skills.
Can you share that with us without editing rights, but so that we would be able to see the notes and scroll out years?
Absolutely, I can share it to you with editing rights, there's no problem with that, so yeah, absolutely.
Well, we don't want everybody changing it, because then we don't know what we're looking at.
No version control.
Well, I would keep the master version, and I hope that you would, if you had, your own notes and things, you could pass them along. But yeah, I'll send this out there, Blake, absolutely.
I mean, if you're putting in the notes, it would be useful for us to be able to look at them. It provides better feedback and
Yeah.
greater understanding, so we don't have to
Yeah.
mash over as much.
And another option, that I could tie into this is I could have this master list, and then that inventory document that we looked at earlier, the asset sheet. This, in some ways, is a lot of those notes. And we could approach it so that we just cross-link to this
Yeah.
type of document.
Into that.
Yeah, as an alternative. But I think having notes that you can click on in the document do make a lot of sense
Here, here.
in many cases. So I'll close that one down, but I was just thinking that's a good resource, a good way to stack some of this information. So we have the detail, and then we come into this more consolidated. So before we go on, I do want to show a little bit more about some of the background that we have here. The transfer station in particular, we do have an ongoing list of assets and the replacement cost, the value. And this is annualized so that we can come up with our estimate of what we will be billing our member municipalities, Fayette and Wayne, for their share of our annualized replacement costs. Because in the past, one thing we hadn't been doing, particularly with Wayne, was we weren't charging them for capital. Even though they were using the facility, we weren't charging them that expense. And we weren't putting away money either, so at least not in a meaningful way. And so this is a way for us to track and understand what's coming up in the same way we should with all of our assets, but specific to that one institutional area.
Eric,
Yeah,
I believe that's the information that the solid waste committee was after, is that page.
absolutely. Although he wanted to see it in our trio accounting, and I was reluctant on that part. But yeah, absolutely, this is what they're looking for.
Right.
And it's lower than last year too, so we can update the budget a little bit and save everybody, including Reedfield, maybe a few $1,000s on that
And
component.
then, Ellen, I have a question that maybe you can either answer or tell us who we would ask. The question was, should we be saving money in specific buckets for each of these capital things, or do we just have a capital fund? Because there are some member towns who are feeling that, for instance, the backhoe should have its own account because it's moving stock and it's different than all the other items up there.
You mean the transfer station items?
Yes.
Or,
And is the backhoe even up there, Eric?
Yeah, it is.
It is, but it's 50% of it. And the backhoe is kind of budgeted anyway, but yeah, I see it as an example, absolutely.
And so, the way we've been doing it is it's a total pot. And then that way, if something
comes
needs,
up.
if something comes up, you have the
Exactly.
funds available,
Yeah.
and they weren't really understanding that, and so Eric did his very best to explain it, but,
Well, and if something comes up and you've got them in these discrete categories, either all the member towns have to sit down and agree to
Transfer.
reallocate the savings. Just like I would assume you sit down and say, boy, now we've got the roof caved in, we got or the trash or that compactor thing.
Yeah.
Came up and now we got to spend it on that. I'm not sure. It just seems to be a little more workable if you have it all in one pot of money.
Great.
I'd recommend sort of a hybrid approach. You know, the first thing is to determine how much should and can we put into these reserves, and in setting a target level for the reserve. It's good to start by looking at the individual assets that may be subject to wear and tear and need to be replaced. But I wouldn't have a separate one, a separate fund for each item, because, it's like if you're hedging on 30 pieces of equipment, that's going to tell you need a much bigger reserve than you really need, because they're not all going to go at one time, hopefully.
Right.
Unless it's something covered by insurance.
Well, I think too, having a plan, so a capital plan, sort of helps that situation. So you're looking at all your assets, just like the last spreadsheet did. It gives every town an idea of when an expense, under the best case scenario, might come up, with the understanding that you gotta decide, things do happen.
Yeah, because on the 5 years, it's big there, like 15, 20, 25. You have multiple things coming due, so we're saving money up so we have it when that time comes.
Well, I also think, as educators, one of the things that if people know what the expenses are going to be, it's a little bit, I guess, easier. I mean, it's just knowledge, it seems, that it's a good idea. I mean, I like it.
Yeah, although something can always happen.
Oh, absolutely. That's what you can't, there's always, I think, a gray area. I think if you know, at least you have some idea of what you're looking at.
Yeah.
It certainly makes it easier for folks to say, well, this is what it is.
I think if we had had this at the meeting, we would have had a little bit different discussion.
Well, and I think
absolutely.
just having had this discussion, in addition to whatever we have with our own auditor, it just allows us to say, we've spoken with several different parties, and this is what the opinions were.
Yeah, yep. One other caveat to this is that, even though they are contributing money to this capital reserve, they don't get it if they leave. So it really does become the purview and it's money that they're paying to us to use our facility. We have complete ownership over that.
Yeah.
There is a caveat there that if
Okay.
the budget, if we have a budget amount and that changes, then we do need to go back to the member towns, as you suggested, and say, hey, we have a capital expense, we need to get your approval on it. So that's I think it's fair and a good discussion.
So in putting away money like this, so all three towns contribute to would contribute to the reserve?
Yes, they do.
Is that equal, or is it based on?
Valuation.
It's formulaic. It's based on value. It's based on our prorated share of state valuation. So
Okay.
basically, we're just under 50%. Wayne is, and Fayette are both around 25, 27, something like that.
Now,
So-
is this negotiated among the three as to how much?
It is, it
It
was,
was,
yeah.
yeah.
And we set it at 8% with the caveat that we could, amend that. And I think this year we'll probably be able to drop it down to 6 or 7%. And I say percent, I should be giving you the full description. Percent of the operating budget in order to meet these projected capital needs. We just work it through that formula.
Sounds great, good planning.
Now, the transfer station is a carry forward account.
It is, absolutely. And so is the capital.
Is there any way to take some of that carry forward money and put into a reserve account?
We could, and so we do have the two different the two different tracks. Operating revenues that are remaining at the end of the year carry forward into an operating reserve in case we had a year where we had the price of scrap metal goes to the floor and we are caught short 5-10 grand. So we have an operating reserve And then we also have this capital reserve, so those are both carried forward.
How about the scale where we put money aside for that? Is that in it?
That's still in here, yeah, that's still in the operating budget, and we are budgeting for the eventual potential replacement of that, or the purchase of it. And I think that's a wise choice, but I think it's one of those things where it's hard to say if it or when it's gonna happen. We're not necessarily sized to really need it, the way our operation works. And we came within, a couple months of putting an article on the town meeting warrant at one point. So some of these things are hard to judge, but I think it's worth putting money aside for them anyway because of the potential for these to become realities.
Would that go into a whole group of saved monies then for capital?
Yeah, it just gets kicked into that bucket of money that we have aside for projects or expenditures that we might want to pursue.
Wouldn't you think on the scale itself, we'd really have to re-examine the payback on that?
We absolutely do.
Because when we looked at the original
Yeah.
work on that, we just didn't get a good product in terms of what the payback would be on it.
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right. I think that when I looked at the numbers and were more reliable numbers, it didn't prove like, it would probably just barely pay for itself over 20 years. It was something like that.
It was very, very long.
It was very marginal, the value. However, if you're looking at it from a question of equity and fairness and, but then you have the operational burden of having a scale operator. And so when you look at it all together, we haven't really finished that debate, but absolutely, we need to continue to look at it.
But we did address that somewhat in revenues that we charged.
Right.
Yeah.
The fee schedule
The
changed.
fee schedule,
And it
the
probably
fee
will again.
schedule actually
Well,
addressed.
that was the first step. That actually, we hadn't adjusted our fees on the transfer station for about 6 to 10 years, I think, and we were far out of date. So when we effectively doubled the cost for demolition debris, that just brought us to break even on the tipping and hauling fees. So we weren't even covering operational expenses like staff or anything like that. So the fees the change to the fee structure that we had a year or two ago really wasn't to address the scale. It was to just get us back to a parity that we were lacking, which the scale could have done the same thing, but this was a much simpler and cleaner way to do it.
Well, and operationally, when you look at other transfer stations, you have two scales. You have an in scale and you have an out scale, because it's very difficult to get people to go twice. There's no way to really make them go around.
We are set up just like a racetrack, though. It really is a nice little circle.
Right. I mean, I'm sorry, I just want to ask this, but the scale and all this stuff, what is the purpose? I mean, I know this is maybe a different thing, but what is the purpose of, I mean, I know that, it helps us with demolition and stuff like that, but are we reasonably expected to think that every single chargeable item that comes into the transfer station will get
No.
charged
No,
for?
the
Okay,
idea is
okay, all right. 'Cause I was, okay, that's good to know.
Demolition.
All right.
It's for things
And
that,
Holy
It would
moly.
be great, but
Well,
the
but
justification,
unrealistic,
Dennis, is
certainly.
that we get charged by our vendor by the pound, but we're charging by volume. We're charging our citizens by
best estimate
volume.
Right.
And the volume of a couch versus the volume of a concrete pier could be equal, but the cost to dispose of that is hugely different.
Right, yeah.
And so that's why the whole discussion ever came about.
Plus the soaking wet sofa.
Now-
Yeah, that's a good point.
They
That's sort of like a
approved
concrete
that
pier.
scale money. The townspeople approved that scale money, so what happens if you don't use it for the scale? Do you have to go back to them and say, this 60,000 we requested for the scale, we would like to,
Yeah, it would be a reappropriation. So it would just be a vote, an article that says to use this money for this purpose, and it would be that simple.
because
And
it
then-
was specifically raised for.
It carries the
for scale,
earmark
So you
until.
couldn't use it for another
Yep.
capital item.
Not without
unless
voter approval.
They approve it, right?
Yep.
okay.
So
But
we
if
have,
we
we
would
have
leave it
that
in-
money now, right?
We do, it's sitting in our account, which is wonderful. We have it in case the backhoe goes, we could get our half just like that. So it is there, and it's good that it's there.
But
I
we
think-
wouldn't even consider, I hope we wouldn't even consider transferring it out of the transfer station.
No,
We
no,
would
I
only
think that
ask for voter
belongs there.
approval to
Do it
change
within
its
the
purpose
transfer
within the transfer station.
Yeah, but you could, I mean, that's the thing about these reserve accounts, is that it is money that has been designated, but at any year, any legislative body can change the intended use of that. Hopefully, we do it intelligently with some good direction from the board, but if we find that we have a surplus in this account, or any account really, we could look at it and say, yeah, maybe that should be repurposed. If, for example, the sidewalk project that we've looked at, we've got $45,000 set aside for that. If in 7 years we find out it just didn't materialize, DOT never came through, whatever it might be, that money's there, we could appropriate that for some other purpose. Maybe we use it to fund a part of a road construction project. Maybe we put it towards another end. But absolutely, we always have, and the voters always have, the option of moving those funds.
But we would do that with particular care on the transfer station, because that's a multi-municipality agreement.
Yeah, I wouldn't dip into this one too far. I think if
Right.
anything, what we should be doing is perhaps maybe reducing the input. Maybe we take a year off of putting money into reserves.
Right.
There's lots of different ways we could approach it. Yeah. Everybody go to transfer station? Okay, all right.
Yeah.
We'll talk about roads for a little bit, and this is, excuse me, that Moxie's getting me.
Yeah.
You gave us this one as a page.
I did, okay, good. So this, and I think I probably had the gravel road numbers in here, but this is our best guess for a very, I won't say variable, but an asset that can change. The needs of any particular road can change. And it's hard to say that every road's gonna last 12 years, but that's the best we can do for a planning process. And so we've put in estimated lifespans and estimated costs. And so now what we have is a very comprehensive, should be every road in town that the town is responsible for, listing of when these things are coming due. So what we can find is, we know that we have an average, but we also say and look and say that, in 2025, that's a gobsmack of roads to pave. We can plan for that. We can look at it and we can try to maybe pull some of those roads and do them a little bit, maybe a year or two early if they need it, or push them out. 2024 isn't looking so bad. 2023, we've got nothing. So this is a great, I think, planning tool. I've been working with the road committee on this. They've been a great asset in helping to get this put together and really asking to say, hey, we need this kind of information in order to make, again, recommendations that are valuable. So this is what feeds into that one line back on the, because if you go to the bottom of this, you have what turns out to be our annualized
That's good.
cost in current dollars. So this gives us an idea of what our bonding might look like every year to complete this full 12-year cycle and to always keep our roads in good condition. Outside of the regular maintenance, this is what we need to put away. So we can plan on this, and this, as I said, that number roughly, because this is it's rough, shows up under where is it? Roads and infrastructure under $150,000, right there. So that is that's where that number comes from. But I just wanted to show you some of the work that went into this document, and I hope to do that. Have another page for fire trucks and fire department. We have a pretty good idea, but more information is always better. And I think that if we continue to develop this, not to the point where it's unwieldy, but to the point where we have the information we need, we'll be in a good spot. So that's my kind of summary of the overall picture there. I do have one for office equipment that I'm barely getting started, but after the discussion tonight, I'm probably going to scrap that, and we're going to look at most of those as operating expenditures.
Yeah.
Eric, I have a question for you on the road one.
Yep.
If you had nothing in 2023, for instance,
Yep.
you could just, and 22, you could just save your money and not fix a road early, correct?
We could, there's a lot of different ways to approach it.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the road at the very top is like the 2017 in the master list.
Yeah.
Is that going to be on this year's schedule?
That one's gonna get some cold patch, or some asphalt, patch. Until we figure out what we're doing with the bridge down there, we don't know what we should be doing with the asphalt. The asphalt is perfectly satisfactory for the residential use it's getting. And this is
Perfect.
exactly the type of discussion we should be having on any of these that are coming up 1, 2, 3 years down the road, or even past due. What's the condition, and do we need to spend money on it? And at this point, that road is so far gone, we're gonna have to reclaim it and rebuild it anyway. So we shouldn't be putting anything more into it, other than cold patch, until we find out what we're gonna do with the bridge.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
Is the road committee addressing that, or thinking of addressing that? I know it's
Absolutely,
been-
and the
It's been
bridge.
kicked down the road a lot.
Well, it is, but we've committed $3,000 to, I'll put it this way. Right now, we have a group of UMaine student engineers, the same ones, the same program that did our transfer station parking and traffic design, that it seems to be working pretty well. They're taking a look at that bridge for us.
Nice.
And coming up with some basic recommendations, some basic information. They've done their test borings, and they're gonna be doing a look at 2 or 3 different options, either remove it and put in a steel girder, or a wooden girder, or remove it and leave it empty. A few different scenarios for it. And so with the road committee, we decided that to support that work, we're gonna be, in this year's budget, have allocated $3,000 for engineering work, professional engineering work, to follow up and supplement what's happening there. So we can get the information we need, again, to make a good informed decision.
Is Orono still working with composite bridges?
They are, they still have the AWAC or
Is that on the Aquifer
AEWC.
program there?
Yep. Yeah, they're doing a lot of that, the laminate beams, the carbon fiber with the concrete inside of it. It's still a first-rate engineering operation up there.
Nice.
So if it pleases the board and the committee, maybe we should now move on to the 2019 and start working on that,
The nitty-gritty?
the nitty-gritty.
Yeah. Do you want to look, are you looking at perhaps looking through this spreadsheet?
Well, you
or-
have down a review and discussion of the 2019 capital
Oh, okay, yep.
investments, so I'm
So
assuming.
we'll just fold up this spreadsheet, and we'll look at the TRIO printout that's included in your packet, and that is the 2019
Custom budget report, right?
custom budget report, yep. And this is where we do have some differences. Some of the items in this do not necessarily show up in the this long-term plan for various reasons, and I'll touch on those as we go through it. The first area is equipment replacement for admin technology. That one, we had budgeted $13,000 to do it all at once, but after tonight's discussion, I think that I will be dropping that out and looking at a 3 to 4 year replacement plan to do 2 or 3 units a year. With the server being accepted, that might still pull money out of our capital reserve. We have right now the $3,729, so I'll likely allocate that for a server, which is a pretty pressing need, and any additional funding for computer replacement will be put into the operating budget for the administration.
Here, here.
All right. That was easy. We'll get through this quick. The next is the 6530 library building, and this is one of those ones that is just a reserve without a real clear end direction, other than the fact that we know the building needs work. I will report that I had a great conversation with Deb Peel, the chair of the library board, about her approach to this, and she and the board, and working with the Friends of the Library, are looking much more towards renovating and upgrading the building that we have, and not so much at a full replacement. They believe that we can make some improvements. They've already done a lot of cleaning up there and organizing, and that with some modest investments, we should be able to install equipment that will allow for more handicap access to the second floor, and also meet some of the other issues that have arisen there, primarily not having an appropriate egress on the second floor in the meeting room. So they're looking at that perspective, and I think that this level of investment over 2 or 3 years while they're trying to figure that out should help them achieve those goals. And as they come further along and have a better capital request form for us, we'll know more about what we need to put away.
So that's a clearer and new direction for them.
Absolutely.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
And one I really appreciate.
It's,
I'm not sure I do, but.
I'm on that Friends of the Library Committee, and people do not want the library to move. They like the library where it is. So now you have to look at the library and make it as efficient as it can be.
Well, and Dale Potter Clark did a really interesting history talk that included that building, and it's got a lot of interesting history. So there are more reasons to fix it, as long as fixing it isn't going to exceed the cost of replacing it. That's always been my pet peeve with this particular building. So if we can upgrade it and make it safe and stable and useful, that's great.
That's our goal.
We probably need an engineering study done on that, or have, I know we've had
They had
some
had one
volunteer.
done, yeah.
You know those University of Maine guys?
Maybe that could be their next year's
I
project.
think it absolutely could be. That's a
Yes.
great suggestion.
Well, we did
And
have a
it's
project with
deals
UMA
sells
where
that
the
thing.
architect students came in and talked about replacements for the same site.
Yeah.
But they were not real refined, they were more idea, vision. They fit on the lot.
So, any other comments about that dollar amount or the idea in general? Does that seem appropriate?
That's fine.
Okay, moving on to 6540, we have the cemetery. And this one, again, is, had been 10,000. The Budget Committee recommended a reduction, and so we followed through with that to 5,000 because of the, I won't call it a lack of clarity. I think they know what they want, but they just don't know when. And so we did follow through and reduce that to $5,000.
Is that the tree work that you were talking about?
That's all 4 of their capital items that they had identified, or 4 or 5. They had the tree work, the vault repairs, and the Reed Cornfield Corner and Case granite walls. And there's just there's a lot of uncertainty and ambiguity around some of that, so I think that we need to clarify that. And yeah, I think that the request forms will be a good way to do that.
So is there money in the cemetery budget for tree work this year?
There is. We've been budgeting $4,000 to $5,000 every year, and so I'm not certain that we're communicating exactly about what's happening, and is this supplemental? Andy, maybe you can. Andy's on the cemetery committee. What do you think, bud?
One of the issues we had was the capital request was primarily for redoing the roofs of a couple of vaults. We've had an engineering estimate for that, but it's like 5 years old, and we're hoping that we can do it for $5,000 if we can find the right contractor. Basically sealing the roofs and then putting plantings that will be happy on the sealed roof on top of it. And if what we have is 5,000, we'll go as far as we can with it. But the tree work is, as far as I know, is still in the budget.
That's a
And
separate
that-
item.
I mean, we could do more tree work than $5,000 worth, but doing it 5,000 at a time kind of gives us a chance to look at what we've done and make sure that, the cemeteries still look as good as they can and they're safe. We don't have branches falling on people.
So I'm just trying to clarify, the 50,000 that's in this capital request, is that comprised of spending 5,000 a year for 10 years? Or is that in addition to the 5,000 we're spending as an expense each year?
No, this particular 5,000 is for one capital project for the.
Yes, I'm talking about up on the screen, the 50,000 that says tree work.
Well, the 5,000, it's 5,000 a year for 10 years, is basically what it is.
Okay.
That will pretty much get to the point where all the old trees are either replaced or
Stabilized.
radically pruned. probably mostly replaced, frankly, within 10 years.
So that may not actually be a capital
Yeah,
expense.
we're talking about
No.
that
Well,
not
we
being.
don't-
Right.
We had a
Yeah, you
discussion
don't want
about
to use,
this
and that's fine
last
by me.
week.
It just-
Yeah, don't
I just
think
wanted
that's
everybody
gonna-
to know that this is something
It's
that's
maintenance.
going to cost that much.
Right.
Yeah,
It is an operating expense, really, but it's a, you know.
It's a
at the end of
continuing
10 years,
operating
It might get
expense.
cheaper.
It
but
might.
Not before that.
Yeah.
I guess my preference would be I'd like to see line 6 removed, because to me, it doesn't fit with the other types of projects.
Right.
If I'm looking out, there we go, that was easy.
that was gone.
Thank you, Eric. Ellen, great job.
Eric's-
Make it be so. And she did. Great. Yeah,
Cool.
okay.
This technology is great. We couldn't do this last year, so
Yeah, man. Thanks, Bill.
here we are.
Yeah, we're
Let's
good.
go.
$5,000.
Okay, so
Yeah, do it up.
the 5,000 is
Mhm.
just in reserve, or it's for the crypt work?
It's
that
for the,
you're-
that's actual, a capital expense that if we can get a good contractor, we'll do next year, this summer.
Okay,
For 2019.
Yeah.
Right.
so are we spending that, Eric, and putting in 5,000 to reserve?
So the 5,000 for crypt, let me look at the cemetery, 5,000. So the 5,000 is just a general reserve for some of these
Bigger projects?
bigger projects. They do have $5,000 or four or five in their operating budget for the crypt repair. So I think that what
Perfect.
Andy was doing, and that the committee was trying to show was, these are some of our major expenditures.
Coming up.
And, you know, the vaults, that one kind of, for me, it kind of is a little bit on the fence as to whether that should be a capital or
Mhm.
not. But the fact that they're addressing it under operating, we have, what, 3 of those? 4 vaults?
Yeah.
And I think that probably, that's another line that could probably go, because if we're doing 5,000 a year in operating, and we have some money being put aside for, you know, this kind of somewhat amorphous, large expenses, if it costs 10, we'll have the money to do it. So I think that seems to be a good approach.
Okay, thank you.
Does that make sense to everybody, or is that? Yeah. The stone walls, that is something that I still don't know where we're gonna land on. Because they're terribly
The
expensive.
cemetery committee hopes we never have to rebuild them, but we're afraid that we may have to, because their foundations are really wet. We're hoping that we can coordinate with the roads committee to do some drainage improvements and dry out the front of that cemetery a little bit. And if so, those walls may stabilize enough that we can leave them as they are, because it's a huge project to redo. And we'd rather not spend the money, but we're afraid not to raise our hands and say we might have to.
Well, I think that's what we've asked committees to do, is to come forward with things, and then,
So
We'll
we know
see.
it's in the horizon there.
Yeah, and we're hoping that we can, it's an avoidable expense, but if it's not avoidable, we'll figure out how to do it as cheaply as we can and still get the job done,
gotcha.
with a lot of help.
Yeah. All right, well, thanks, Andy. That was really good information. I'm glad you have those many hats.
I'm wearing too many hats, but we'll work on it.
No.
It's just right.
Luckily, you have a big head. I meant that good. No, Andy, I meant that.
That's in a good way.
Yeah, that's right.
He's a new guy.
All
He's
right,
the new guy.
I don't know.
That is on film,
Familiar
Dennis.
with the decorum here, okay.
65, 55.
Yeah, good.
We should probably be moving along.
Yes.
We have the 35,000 for the salt sand shed repair.
And
We've
that's a
talked-
repair.
That is a repair, not a replacement.
Yeah.
The building, to replace it, I can't imagine what the cost would be, but it would probably be at least 2 or 3 times that. And this repair, many municipalities are dealing with this exact same problem, because back 25 years ago, there was a program put in place to ensure that salt bearing materials and straight salt were kept undercover. There was grants, and these things were constructed at little to no cost to the towns. Many of them in the very same way, a nice round sphere with a yurt type roof on it, and they have the same problems with the salt eating into the concrete, getting to the rebar, which is the support structure, causing that to rust, which causes the concrete to pop off. And so Mount Vernon did this literally 2 years ago, so we have a very good idea what this is going to cost.
Thank you.
And the expected life of that repair would be another 20 years?
I'd say at least another 20 years, yeah. We might, at that point, need to be doing something to the trusses, but those, as long as we keep the material away from them, seem to be doing okay.
No.
And the roof is in good enough shape?
Yeah,
Like
the roof,
outer
it's
shell?
shingled. I'd have a hard time saying how long that's gonna last, but probably at least another 10, 15 years.
Perfect.
Is nice.
All right, moving on to the next item, we have $15,000 and for 80/90, excuse me, under 65/55. And this note here is 10,000 for paving reserve, 5,000 for Torsi Bridge. And that 10,000 for paving reserve is just a continuation of the placeholder that we put in while we were focusing on gravel road work over the past 2 years and not putting so much money into paving, that signing the commitment that we have to make that work happen. Now we have a much better idea of it's going to be 150, and we're going to start that, I hope, next year. Putting that money away, and we'll look at that in the debt horizon picture at some point here. But the Torsi, that is the second half of a 2-year savings plan that we put in place. This is the second year. We expect that those repairs will cost just about $10,000, and we should be doing that work in conjunction with the Torsi Pond Association, who will be doing similar crack repair to their gate structure, dam structure, which is contiguous with our bridge.
So that'll be a coordinated project.
Yes.
And the idea is that that work would happen in the summer of 2019?
Maybe. The road committee, consisting mostly of engineers and a few lay people, wasn't convinced that the work needed to be done that soon. But at the very least, we will have the money available if and when that needs to happen. So.
Great.
Okay, moving on, 65 capital improvements equipment. We have, under 6530, two pieces of equipment, 5,000 for a general reserve for equipment replacement, and 10,000 for a specific piece of equipment, which is the sickle bar mower for the John Deere tractor, which had a major malfunction last summer and was basically a complete loss. It did last about 10 years. I expect that with different use and not bringing this forward for interlocal work, which was really something that we didn't initiate. The town of Wayne signed a 5-year mowing contract with a private resident or a private contractor, even though we had an interlocal agreement. Basically said, we don't want to be part of this so much anymore, so a $10,000 investment for us will pay off, rather than paying $5,000 a year to have somebody else do it, probably per full rotation, we'll have the equipment available and we can use our maintenance staff to perform that work. So I think it's a good investment for us.
And that'll just be for Reedfield.
Just for Reedfield, it will not be used by other municipalities.
Has Wayne signed off on that interlocal agreement? And because what's involved in that is a tractor as well.
Yeah, they and the school have both kind of said, we're not gonna touch it. I did have a phone call with the finance director of the school and talked, after she talked with the superintendent, and I talked with the Wayne town manager. And they're not interested in investing in and paying for some of the repairs to that tractor, so it's tricky because it's a funny interlocal agreement, but I think that what in effect is happening is they're saying we're taking our hands off of this, and the town of Reedfield is maintaining ownership of that equipment, and when that equipment does finally outlive its usefulness, we'll probably just start from scratch. It'll just go away, and the interlocal agreement will go away, and if we want a new tractor, we can buy one ourselves, or we can say, let's try this again. But they've basically taken their hands off of it.
So you don't think we need to legally dissolve that?
I think we probably do at some point, but it's a bit tricky because there still is some capital rights that the other municipalities have to that equipment.
They could surrender that in a dissolution.
Yeah, so we'd have to go through a process of looking at the current value of it, and
Yeah, okay.
it's probably just, in my view, not worth it. I'd rather just let it ride out, but that's
When
But-
does it expire?
It doesn't really. I think it just continues.
Evergreen.
and Every, yeah.
So maybe you could bring that to the select board and we could discuss it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, I'm sorry, it does expire. There is a, I think it's every 3 or 5 years there's an opportunity, but the most recent opportunity was a year or two ago, so I'll look into that again.
Thanks.
Let's see, look at it.
Okay, so that finished off equipment.
Yeah, the new line, and what I like to see here is capital leases. And this brought the purchase of capital equipment out of operating budgets into a capital account where I believe it really belongs. It's more transparent and it helps reduce some of these spikes that we see, maybe a 1 year, maybe a 3-year spike, if we need to buy a new lawnmower, a new sidewalk machine. So I think it puts it in the appropriate location. So this is something I'm quite happy with. And we have 3 items here. The first is the third year, the last year payment for the John Deere mower. That's the zero turn. And that has been an exceptional piece of equipment for us, especially once we had the proper operation happening. They had some traction issues, and it turned out that the weights weren't on the front of the machine, and that caused some real problems. But in any event, they've figured it out, and it's working great for us. The sidewalk vehicle, we're looking at $16,000, and that is essentially for a roughly $45,000 purchase, plus financing costs over a 3-year term.
So it's really a
numbers.
lease to own.
It's really a lease to own, yep, that's right. And that's the same thing we did with that John Deere, the $3,000 above it, that's also a lease to own.
And you have actually tested out some of that equipment
We
for a
have.
sidewalk machine this year.
We tested out 2 of the most likely candidates, one being a Ventrac, which is a articulating tractor. It's a fairly small tractor, but quite powerful, and it did meet our needs from what we could see. We also tried out a Bobcat, which was exceptional in its diversity and ability to perform lots of tasks. The snowblower we had on it wasn't quite enough. So we will be looking at what type of snowblower we can get, that will fully meet our needs, and that would be something more of a dual auger, taller snowblower. So we had some really good opportunities, and we have some great pricing on those items as well, so we're fully prepared to move forward next year.
Excellent. And we would be selling the holder?
Selling or trading in, we would look at both options and see which one we get the most value out of.
Okay, and so that might reduce this capital expense here?
It would,
And
and
would it
what
come in as a revenue?
it would come in as a revenue, and what I would likely do is put it in for the next year as an earmark for offsetting the next year's expense.
It's likely not to be a lot.
Yeah.
Likely not to be more than, I mean, I hope it'd be upwards of 10 to 20,000, but
Really?
because we really have put, I mean,
Mhm.
literally, we've put $25,000 into that over the past 3 years, so,
We bought it
3
for
to 4
what?
years anyway. But doesn't mean you get it all back.
Right.
I guess you can't hold her on to it.
No, you can't.
Sorry, is it almost 8?
That's,
Thanks, Doug. That's my cue to hurry up.
And you guys don't have to sit with them every other week.
That's right, yeah.
Dennis starts dropping bad puns.
Yeah,
I know
oh
that.
boy, yeah.
I gotta
yeah,
get
exactly.
moving.
Oh.
Gotta get moving.
I think somebody's getting tired.
Better get him on track
We're gonna
here.
get him back to work.
Yeah, I know,
Vacation's
right?
making you
Too
punchy.
much time.
So we do have just 2 items there. I thought I had 3, but moving on to transfer station, we have a couple of items here. The first is the miscellaneous. This is the money that we receive from all 3 towns for our capital reserve. This just shows that, yes, we have this money coming in, and yes, we are allocating it for future expenditures so we can drop it into that reserve account. You'll see on the end of this sheet, revenues of 11,000 and change coming in from the other 2 municipalities. The remainder, roughly 9,000. And these numbers will drop, like I said, by about $2,000 to $3,000 based on the revised schedule for capital savings. So that remainder is coming through taxes. we haven't been able to find an offset, although that could be a use, as you mentioned, perhaps for our operating reserve if we felt comfortable doing that, but I wouldn't recommend that right now. So that's the 20,000 that we have for the capital reserve. 6,000 is for a roll-off container, one of the 40-yard ones. And we have two different types of containers at the transfer station. We have the octagons, which are the compactor backs. Those are the ones that attach to the unit, and the recyclables and compacted materials go into those. When I say roll-off or open top, I'm referring typically to the large containers, the metal, the demolition, tires, those large boxes. So we have one that's well past its prime. The gate no longer closes properly. It has 6 to 8 inch rust holes in the bottom, and it's just pretty well beat out of shape. So we're replacing that. And the other item is a $5,000 allocation for a gatehouse. And it's not, I shouldn't say gatehouse, it's really an attendant booth. And we did have some discussion about how best to utilize that and whether we should make it a permanent structure or not. And on second thought, I think that perhaps my approach will be to initially put it out as a mobile structure, not put electricity and other amenities in it, and just make sure that it does fit the bill in that location before we fully commit to adding utilities and making it harder to move. This is something that was planned for with our traffic and parking plan. We intentionally left about a 6-foot wide divider in between the lanes. And this is a place so that the attendant can be out front and talk with residents, customers as they come through, collect the money, tell them where to go, and have a much more efficient operation. That's the plan anyway. So I think that it's a necessary expense. It is in line with what we've been working towards, and I am reconsidering and looking at making it a bit more movable in the event that it's not a successful
So
placement.
does that mean the price tag goes down because this assumes electricity and heat?
This does assume electricity and heat. I wouldn't probably drop it too much because I'm not entirely comfortable with where that number can end, but
But I think you had
They're going to have
said,
some alternate heat in there. I'm sorry.
no,
Talk over you.
but the electricity you had said would have to go underground, and so that was probably going to be at 1,000 of that
yeah,
cost.
it would be. So, and it doesn't mean necessarily that we don't try this through the summer months and then realize that, okay, this is the right place. Later on in the year or next spring, we could put the utilities in to make it more, because the attendants right now are or should be out talking to the customers when they're not in the office. So all this really is another way, another place for them to put a clipboard and a cash purse, and to have a place to sit if they choose. If not, it can just be a place to stay out of the weather. So I think that we can take this two-phase approach of looking at it that way.
Now, just to update everyone else, we had talked at the last solid waste meeting, and we'll be meeting again in April, and there was discussion that we might try to have this built for the beginning of the season, so have it come out of this year's budget, not the one we're budgeting for. And all 3 towns are sharing that cost anyway. So it would just be that the 3 select boards would have to agree to spend the approximate $1,700 out of money
carry
that
forward, yeah.
carry forward that's already in the account. So it wouldn't be showing up in this budget.
Which would be a nice option. And
And
so,
then
yeah.
it would set the season. So you'd start the season with the summer folks coming in, as well as most people who are coming with demolition stuff, more so in the spring than in the winter.
Absolutely.
And it just pushes those guys down front. That's the whole, I mean, we just want them at the beginning of the flow.
Yeah.
So
Right.
that
Absolutely.
rather than catch them all, be out there at the front.
Yeah, well, you think about it, you got 4 or 5 cars parked in that area before, even now with this new layout, and they're still having to run from one to the next.
Yeah.
What do you have, what do you have? It's so much more efficient to have one person handling the intake and the payment and the direction of where you put the material, and one person verifying
Yeah.
and compacting and doing the work down at the other end. So I think it's gonna work out beautifully, but we'll see.
I bet it's going to work out beautifully.
Right. So unless there's any more on transfer station, I'll move on to
dam.
The dam.
Damn the damn.
This one, we are looking at a $300,000 expense. The intent is to bond that, and we'll look at that shortly. We do have 125,000 roughly in reserve. That's going to be diminished by another 1,000 or two because we had to pay for more engineering design from GEI because the Army Corps of Engineer did not like what we had submitted for our permitting, so we had to redo that. So that's going to be diminished some. I don't believe that I'm going to change too much on that, though, because the $300,000 is incredibly, I think, generous, and it might reduce what we have left over at the end to put towards other future maintenance. But
And over what term now?
12 years we're looking at, 10 or 12, 10 or 12. I can't remember exactly which, but
And that's for, what is that, our 40, 50 year? I mean, this is a huge.
Yeah.
it is a very
Lifespan.
long-term. The lifespan of that, of the gate should be, the gate, which is the moving part, the concrete should be at least, 50, but the gate, I think, was 40 with a 20 to 25 year maintenance. It should last 40. So, yeah. So looking at the revenues, this is where we see the bond proceeds coming in, the 177,000 in bond proceeds. And that would be offsetting the total $300,000 expenditure.
So what do that's what, how long are you going to bond for?
The bond would be 10 or 12 years. I think it was probably 10 when I talked to
Oh,
the
this
bond
would
bank.
be,
Yeah.
okay, this would be the total bond expense.
Yeah, that's the
This
money.
is the
that we-
revenue coming in so we can pay out.
And then above that, I shouldn't skip that. This is the 11,000 that is the revenues from the two towns that will offset that $20,000 capital expense that you saw for the reserve. That's that.
All right.
Where in the budget would the interest on bond payments show up?
Interest, that would be under debt service, yeah, and we did up that number from a straight proration, well, I guess a two-part answer. The interest and the principal are both under debt service. Also included in the first year payments are the anticipated bond council costs.
And are you still thinking that this project and the bonding would take place in 1819 or in 1920?
It will more than likely start, given the way things are looking right now and with the permitting process. The work will start spring of 2019, and the project will be completed in 2020. Or, excuse me, not 2019. It will be
Fall.
completed in the fall of 2019, in fiscal year
2020.
2020. Yeah. Yeah.
But we need the funds in this year to get it started.
We need to start the bond process in the fall issuance for the Maine Municipal Bond Bank, which I did talk to a couple banks, and the numbers I got were not promising. They were looking at 4.5%, 4.25%. Bond Bank will certainly be able to do better than that.
Yeah, okay.
So it makes sense financially and functionally, operationally to approach it that way. I can't see any other way of doing it at this point.
We just have to wait for Winthrop to be able to get through their budgeting.
Yeah, and they're kind of a question to some extent. We've been waiting and waiting for a discussion of how they plan to do this. Haven't heard. I know that, I mean, they're working very hard. I don't want
Right.
to disparage them at all, but the
They're
further
just
along this
slower
gets,
than us.
yeah, it's harder for us to plan ahead. So we need to plan further ahead to accommodate for that.
We
Thank you for
did
that.
have a joint meeting with the Winthrop Council, and I do know both you and town manager over there have been very coordinated in terms of looking at this.
Yeah, we're finding some separation now because they haven't figured out their financing. I think we have a pretty good idea of where we're going to be.
Okay.
Well, thank you for jumping right on that.
Yeah.
Yes. It needs to be done. That thing's been since I started here, even before I started.
Yeah.
Here, it's been
It was real cheap back then.
There's dire need to
though.
resolve that.
Yes.
All right, okay, next topic.
It was about 150.
125?
total?
Yeah.
105.
All going down shovel sand.
In your packets, I have 3 additional pages, and these are for reference. I will run through them fairly quickly. The first is a color-coordinated graph showing the reserve funds and the both formats, the designated and undesignated reserves. Budget sheets, this is what I want. This is the update. Where are we? No, we're not doing debt, we're doing FB. Yep, okay, this isn't going to show very well because of the resolution. But in your packets, you have this document, and the green shows the draft audit numbers, again, which came in better than projected. Right now, we do this exercise to show where our reserves are at, so that we can have 2 pieces of information, in my view. First, are we meeting our target, which in this case of reserves, we are. We want to maintain 2/12 of our annual operating budget for the year, or not operating budget, our entire budget for the year. And we've exceeded that currently by $94,000. However, this projection is based on a flat school budget. Once that number comes in, $200,000 higher, this number will drop significantly, and it will likely be $25,000 to $50,000 surplus, which I think is a fair margin for that, $1.1 million objective.
Now, that's still 50,000 in excess of the 2/12.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It is. So, like I said, on $1 million, it's not bad.
Right.
And one thing I wanted to point out is that, again, we are trying to reduce, to some extent, these reserve balances in order to get as close to that goal as we can. If we have less than that, we might not be being as responsible as we should be. But also, on the other side, if we have too much money in reserves, that's also an issue. So we're trying to land a little bit on a dime. But I think we're pretty close. One of the ways we're doing that is trying to constrict how much money goes into the reserve accounts at the end of every year by budgeting more tightly. That's why you see a projected decline over the next 3 years, is that intent to have less money going in, less money coming out to offset taxes. It's just a better cycle and more accurate and more accountable. Any questions on these numbers, graphs, reserves?
I guess I just want to make this statement for anyone who might be watching this, that means we are going to raise less in taxes and we're going to have less to put back into taxes because we're budgeting better. Is that correct?
That's a great way to put it.
So we're letting the people keep their money until we need it, and that's when we'll raise it.
Exactly. The next sheet is a sheet that shows anticipated balances. And this one ends in 2017, and I'm going to open up a different sheet, one that we have put together that shows what we're looking at the end of 18 based on our estimates of expenditures over the next several months, what we've spent so far, revenues that will move forward into these carry forward accounts. So I'm going to open that up. But in order to look squarely at an expenditure or an operating budget and say, what do we have to pull from? What do we have to offset some of these expenditures? And are we maintaining reliable and responsible levels in some of these accounts? It is important to project forward at the end of the fiscal year so we know what people have to work with. And this year, for the first time in a few, we won't be pulling anything out of the fire department reserves because things have found a fairly good balance. We want them to continue to have a reserve that's, say $40,000, and they're about there. So it's a good way for us to look and see where things are landing. And I'm starting to ramble, so I got to open up that spreadsheet really quick. CIP worksheet, here we go.
We're a little beyond 8 o'clock, but I don't think we need a motion. We're all set going a few more minutes, right?
Yeah.
Here
we go, carry forward, that's what I wanted.
I can only do a few.
It's a workshop.
So this one.
I think you're over your limit, actually.
Does, the one on screen now does have the FY 18 ending balance projections. And that was what we used when we were discussing with the chairs and the various committees and even amongst ourselves, how we're going to approach capital expenditures and use of those funds. So I'm just going to cruise down through this list on the left a little bit, and if you see anything you want to look at, let me know. Otherwise, I will provide this sheet with the projections to you all, so you can look at that in addition to what was provided in your packet.
Thank you.
It's good.
Now, is there any of these carry forward? No, I think I'm answering my question, but, for instance, on these summer roads, 133,000, that's not a balance left in that account for spring work, that's,
That, so if you look at which sheet are you referring to?
summer
first?
roads.
So you're looking at the one in the packet, yeah.
Yeah.
So that would be, as of June 30th of 2017, the actual balance after we have expended, and so if you move from left to right, you see these categories,
Yep.
the columns, and that shows, what the initial budget was, the expenditure out of the budget amount,
Yep.
what amount might remain, what revenues may have gone in to offset. And so it's basically some of these lines add, some of these subtract, and what you end with is that number.
So that money is available not to do spring work, but to offset some of the
Summer.
2018-19 road work.
Exactly, and so
Okay.
that's why we did this projection that's on the screen,
Hmm.
so we could say, at the end of this year, where are we gonna be, and what can we pull for
Right.
next year? Yeah. No, that's absolutely right, John.
Perfect.
So I'll keep scrolling through this quickly. Like I said, fire department's looking good. Yeah, most of these are pretty straightforward, so.
We have taken a fair amount of money out of the fire department carry forwards, because they were.
Yeah, they were
getting
high,
up there.
yeah.
They were getting up there.
And we put that, I believe, right towards the
To the
fire
truck.
truck
That's
payment.
right.
Yeah,
yeah.
no, I think it was
Yeah.
a good action. And Lee's happy that we're not gonna be fiddling with it again this year, but, he should be, because we found a balance, so.
Right.
All right,
And he's got a new truck.
and he's got a new truck, and he's
truck.
probably gonna get a new one in 3 years.
No,
Speaking of
yeah.
which, the last page is our debt service schedule. And let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So the dam is looking at a 10-year. So on this sheet, the yellow highlight is the fiscal year that we are planning for. As you can see, we still have road bonds, 2 of them that we'll be paying off. However, at the end of this projected FY19, we will be losing one of those and having a little bit of capacity. But as we discussed, next year we'll have to start putting away $150,000 for paving again. So that gap that you see really doesn't disappear the next 2 years.
Right.
What does happen is then in 2022, we retire that second road bond, and then we have opportunity for additional expenditure. However, that's also the year that one of the fire trucks is up. And I think Ellen made a joke about that. And then I talked to Lee, 2 days later, he said, yeah, that's the year.
Well, and
So-
this brings me back to what I had mentioned before. So that's a $200,000 truck, but in 2024, there's a $225,000 truck,
Yes.
just 2 years out. So that, I think we need to look at how that's going to fit, because then you're out to 2030 and 33 and 36. So it's kind of like every 2 or 3 years, we're getting hit with $250,000.
Yeah. And
So this is a big deal.
It is a big deal, and I'm not sure how we got there, but fire trucks are tricky. They're very expensive, and when needs arise, I think that's when we invest in those things. So I think the only really good way to deal with that is just through bonding and making sure that we have long-term bonds that spread that burden out as much as possible.
Same what we did with the roads.
Yeah, and so, the fire truck bond, we've got let's see, 3, 6, an 8-year on that one. Maybe we should be going 10 or 12, or more, but.
Right, I guess what I was just saying is, obviously with my comment I made earlier, I support buying these, but I think seeing that they're coming together more closely,
Yeah,
I think we want to look at those and see how we can put those in with that road work that we know is going to bump in at the same time.
Yeah.
And maybe have a bigger bonding picture than just for the first truck, but kind of figure out how we're going to bond the next 3 trucks with the road work, and where's that going to put us?
That's a good exercise.
I think that shows the problem that towns create for themselves, actually, because they get comfortable in not spending money on roads, to fix roads. They get comfortable with fire department, they patch fire trucks, and then all of a sudden, I see that in my business all the time. People don't buy equipment. They put it off, they patch it, they fix it, they patch it. All of a sudden, instead of one piece of equipment,
all
they need
fails.
5. You know, and it's like, oh my God, how am I gonna do this? And that's what happened with the roads. I think if you look at all the bonds on the roads, it's probably $3 million expense in the last dozen years
Yeah, well, and a
that
lot
we
of
had
it.
to spend because
Yeah, absolutely.
And it all
nothing
fails
was
at
done.
once, and
Yep.
you're never getting on
Yep.
a nice, even
Yep.
cycle.
Which
So
is
I-
why we need to do that, and it's great that you guys have
Right.
looked at that going out.
One good thing about the roads, they do fail at different rates, so we do have that.
Well, because of usage, yeah, because of usage, you're right.
Yeah, I mean, Church Road is a
Yeah.
lot more beat up than even South Road, which was done 6 years prior, probably.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
I think Catherine's absolutely right. You know, we ought to look at bond capacity
Yep.
and sort of try to build some predictions around that and tie, you know, you're just going to have on-ramps and exit ramps for different things, and perhaps even moving something 1 year, depending on if it can happen, with whatever the carrying capacity is of town for bonds, makes a lot of sense.
Well, then with this new information that you're doing, it's sort of, especially with the road stuff, the 12-year, you know, the sort of
Yeah,
cycle
yeah.
stuff, being able to plan.
Yeah,
seems
we know
like a
it's not
smart
gonna be
idea.
that different on aggregate. That's
Yeah.
the good thing. We know on aggregate, it's gonna be pretty close.
Well, and to allay people's fears, as well as, well, didn't you just ask me for a bond last year and the year before? Why are you asking me again? I think if we can present it kind of at the beginning, okay, we're going to have 3 fire trucks in the next 5 years, so this is what we're looking at.
And this is how we plan.
And we're also getting rid of bonds over the next,
Yeah.
you know,
Right.
so.
Point out the
paying
ones we're
some
getting
off,
rid of, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because these rose bonds are falling off. I think,
But
for the
it's all
next 3 or 4
financial
years.
management.
Right.
Yeah, but that 150 is gonna show up and it will be pretty constant. And I'm not showing it as a bond here or debt service, because it may not be.
Yeah.
We might be able to float 3 or 4 years before we perhaps have to bond, if at all.
Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah.
Please, tell the road committee and yourself that you did a great job on that,
Yeah.
Yeah, it certainly helped my thinking a lot.
yeah. I mean, it really opens your eyes, and it gives you a good idea of what's ahead of you.
That's fantastic. And
Right.
we've been told that you folks on the budget committee worked really hard on thinking about the dam and how to fund that and so on. We really appreciate all that work you've done.
The damn thing.
The damn.
I was waiting for Dennis to do that.
Damn. That's what we're calling it.
Are there any other concluding remarks
No.
or thoughts that people would like to add or questions?
Do you need a motion?
Thank you.
I'll take a motion to
I
adjourn.
move that we adjourn.
I second that.
All in favor?
Thanks, everybody, for the great feedback.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ready? Frank?
Thank
Thanks
you.
for all your hard work.
Thank you.